Hi everyone, my name's Steve Khan. I'm a Principal Engineer with GHD up in Auckland, and on behalf of Water New Zealand, welcome to this introductory session, overview session for the second edition of the Water New Zealand Inflow and Infiltration Manual. I'm going to cover in a bit of depth and detail some of the sections of the new manual, and certainly the manual was formed based on user needs from the Water New Zealand membership community, and given the previous version of the manual was written in 1996, certainly time for an update. So today I'm just going to talk through some of the sections of the manual, and they'll be interspersed with talking with slides and we talking to those slides. First volume contains lots of background information, descriptive material, and is more set up for the asset manager, the wastewater system asset manager. Volume 2 has a lot more descriptive detail on technical processes, calculation methods and the like. So that's more set up for the practitioner, the person that's doing a lot of that II analysis. The two volumes parallel each other in terms of their chapters. So there's 17 chapters in both, and they're the same chapters, same chapter sections. So section 1 really deals as an introduction to inflow and infiltration. It's important to understand the difference between inflow and infiltration. Inflow being the result of direct connections from stormwater sources. Infiltration more being, as the diagram explains, more seepage of runoff through cracked pipes and manholes and the like. Section 2 really covers how inflow and infiltration reduction sits in the whole suite or the toolbox of other system improvement tools that are possible. It is certainly one tool in a number of tools that are possible in terms of improving wastewater system performance. Section 3, as the diagram shows, is a roadmap through the rest of the document, and there's a flowchart there that does guide you through which sections may be appropriate for the issue you're actually looking at. Section 4 talks in a good level of detail about the necessary community and community engagement programs and consultation programs that are a really fundamental part to a successful II program. And there's some examples in there of how various agencies, both in New Zealand and around the world, have gone about doing this, engaging with the communities about the reasons for the program and some of the material and how you might go about doing that. Section 5 gets into a bit more technical detail about the components of II and understanding the difference, like I was saying, between inflow and infiltration, and even the different sources of infiltration, be they groundwater infiltration or rainfall-induced infiltration. There's a section there too about the key performance indicators, how we measure inflow and infiltration, and they're the basis of, those parameters are the basis upon which you can then go and assess the severity of your problem and then work out the fix for that problem. It's key to understand too, once you've got those parameters defined, what the threshold values are that you would want to be, your parameters would want to be above for you to justify the expenditure on an II program, and where you're likely to get success from that. And we're certainly recommending that if your parameters are not meeting those threshold values, it's probably not worth undertaking II reduction works. Section 7 really then talks about the predictability of II reduction. So what we've been able to do is, through a research program of projects carried out here in New Zealand, across Australia and throughout North America, what levels of II reduction have agencies achieved from different levels of system rehabilitation. And where those programs have been successful, we've captured that data and made some sense of it to now say, if you do a certain amount of work, you will achieve a certain level of II reduction. And that's quite a key piece of information to make planning about II programs far more reliable. Section 7 also has some interesting outcomes from Watercare's work in this regard about a predictive II model based on nearly 40 catchments they did as part of the Project Care program in the North Shore City days. Section 8 talks about private property II reduction, and given that the results from the previous, as you'll see in the previous section, half the removable II comes from private property. Councils and water agencies don't tend to own the house laterals, so it is a rather vexatious issue as to how to fix that and who pays for that. So there's some guidelines and information about what agencies around the world are doing in relation to reducing the II from private properties. if you are not looking at that, you are really only dealing with half the problem. So it's an important consideration in any IO program. Section 9 covers about seawater ingress, and that's been quite an issue some places, certainly in Australia, but even in New Zealand as well. And Section 10 talks about preventive IO measures. The previous sections are more about the cure. This is talking about the prevention. How do you stop IO getting into your system in the future? And we talk about pressure sewers and low IO specifications, building off some of the work that's done in Australia in that regard. Section 11, as the diagram shows, the flowchart shows, this is the 5-step process that where that's been followed around the world, good outcomes have generally resulted. So we're certainly strongly recommending, if you are undertaking an IO program, that you follow very closely and very rigorously that 5-step process. And then the subsequent sections deal with detail associated with those 5 steps. Section 12 is about the pre-rehabilitation flow monitoring and analysis. Section 13 talks about the source detection, and there's various methods by which source detection, IO source detection, can be done, generally involving a lot more field work. It's important to understand that that's the second stage of the process. A more costly unit costs in that source detection phase are far greater than doing the flow monitoring analysis. So you're using the outputs from the pre-rehabilitation analysis to then guide and scope the work you're doing in the source detection. Section 14 then really gets into system rehabilitation and the various methods that are around for pipeline and manhole rehabilitation. And there's a good table in there that compares the pros and cons and benefits and advantages, disadvantages of various rehabilitation methods. Section 15 talks about how you actually measure and calculate whether your program's been successful in reducing inflow and infiltration. There's various techniques by which you can do this, and experience has shown that it's often the analytical process you undertake which can often determine the levels of reduction you've achieved, and the rigour by which you follow that process, how successful your program can actually be done. There's various levels of complexity, and therefore various levels of investment you can go through to achieve those results. And we're certainly recommending that the calibrated model technique is the most robust process, but does involve the maximum level of investment and complexity. Section 16 talks about the cost effectiveness and the methodology for doing that. The cost effectiveness, how well does the investment you've made compare with the reduced costs of operating the system that you're then incurring? So it's the benefit cost ratio and how that's actually calculated. And can is there an economic case to do the program? And it's useful to do that obviously before you start the program, but also then to review that once the program has been done, and did your initial assumptions actually ring true with the outcomes in the end. That will help obviously in planning future IO reduction works. Section 17 is the last section, and that contains a number of case studies, 5 of which from New Zealand, the more advanced IO programs happening in New Zealand. There's 5 of those, and a couple from overseas, the more comprehensive programs overseas, particularly in the US. So sections 1 through to 17 in each of the 2 volumes is a comprehensive coverage of good practice for IO reduction, and certainly recommended to the Water New Zealand membership. Experience has shown throughout the world that if you are following good practice, you are going to maximise your chances of getting good outcomes through your programs. So for the sake of the Water New Zealand industry, we certainly strongly recommend those of you undertaking IO reduction programs or considering those to follow very closely the guidelines in the 2nd edition of the Water New Zealand IO manual. Thank you.